There's really no question that the last dozen years have belonged to the MCU, but the DCEU in a single move might have just paved the way for a bright future for the distinguished competition. The Marvel Cinematic Universe rewrote the rules for what a franchise can be, and have been reaping the box office rewards ever since. But in the wake of the triumphant Avengers Endgame, the MCU may have painted itself into a corner. But some recent announcements and an unexpected move that populated a multiverse might even mean that the next decade could belong to DC. Ever since the Marvel Cinematic Universe exploded on the screen in 2008, the MCU has been considered the model of how to construct a shared cinematic universe. The MCU has gone from strength to strength, with high enough highs to cover the low points. Viewed as playing catch-up, the DC Extended Universe, or DCEU, has not been quite as fortunate. The DCEU movies, like their Marvel counterparts, have had big financial successes, but they haven't had the same cultural penetration nor adulation that the flashy Marvel movies have. Some have even criticized their more mature, dark take, labeling the movies grimdark. Who you callin' grimdark? Most of that aesthetic is informed by the director in the Joss Whedon rollover at the distinguished competition, Zack Snyder. Zack Snyder has managed to create a fierce love him or hate him following with little room in between. And he's had his own shares of conflicts with the studio as he created a template for the DCEU. Some of that conflict has manifested in final cuts that were not Snyder's. Rather than take his ball and go home though, Snyder enlisted his fans and was able to get releases of his own cut of Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice that was better received. More importantly, DC has managed to turn its critical reception problems around with theatrical releases as well. Patty Jenkins' Wonder Woman starring Gal Gadot was a huge hit critically at the box office. Shazam managed to add some levity to the otherwise dark universe. Then there was the character that was considered so unlikely to get a hit movie, it became the premise of Entourage, where someone gets famous playing him, Aquaman. And yet, Jason Momoa nailed it. Nailed it! Last year, Marvel put the cherry on top of their shared universe experiment with Avengers Endgame, which became the highest grossing movie of all time. All time. Since then, where the MCU goes from there has been the subject to speculation and mystery. Deep-cut characters like Shang-Chi and the Eternals are set to find their way to the screen. The hope is that they'll replicate the success of Guardians of the Galaxy. Over at DC, however, the future is brighter than anyone would have thought a few years ago. Tragedy struck during the final days of production of Justice League that resulted in Marvel's former golden boy Joss Whedon taking over. The result was an uneven film that fans and critics were largely split on. Just like Dawn of Justice, there was the specter of Snyder's intended cut, but now the cut will see the light of day on HBO Max next year. Wonder Woman 1984 is set to hit theaters when theaters can be theaters again, which promises to be an exciting follow-up. Another refugee from Team Marvel has taken the reins of the troubled Suicide Squad franchise with the addition of James Gunn, and we're sure to get the action comedy that the title deserves. Recently, there's been rumors that have made fans truly excited for the future of the DCEU, and that's the return of Michael Keaton to the role that arguably created the modern superhero movie, Batman. And while those future movies are pretty exciting, it's the Michael Keaton announcement that makes that after stumbling out of the gate, the DCEU might have just redefined the idea of a shared universe and created a bigger and more sustainable future than even the seemingly unstoppable Marvel Cinematic Universe. Comic books have a built-in advantage. They can just keep on going. Bruce Wayne began his vigilante quest to beat up all the violent weirdos of Gotham City in 1939, and he hasn't lost a step since. In 1961, the Barry Allen Flash cracked time and found himself teaming up with the Jay Garrick Flash, creating the idea of multiple universes. After the Flash met Flash, the DC universe was split into an Earth 1, full of Silver Age DC, and Earth 2 with Golden Age heroes. Once those floodgates opened up, a nearly infinite number of universes existed, allowing writers to just create their own timeline stories. 46 years after Batman swung into action, DC Comics was facing a confusing knot of different continuities and timelines. Crisis became the term for stories where different timelines would interact. And in 1985, that crisis spanned all the infinite universes. The idea was to clean up the messy universe of DC by wiping out most of them. Back to the modern age and shared universes, the DCEU has taken a perceived weakness and turned it into a strength, using Crisis on infinite Earths, and it all came from an unlikely source. While the MCU struggled with its vague continuity between Marvel Entertainment properties like the Defenders and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., DC had two parallel shared universes running side by side. On the big screen was Snyder's DCEU with its own Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and The Flash. On the home screen, led by Greg Berlanti and the hit TV show Arrow, a whole other DC universe popped up with its own Superman and Flash as well as others. For most of the time, these two properties existed side by side with no relation to each other. Just like he did in 1961, the Arrowverse Barry Allen Flash met the Jay Garrick Flash and created the idea of a multiverse for the Arrowverse. There's one important choice in doing that has laid the groundwork for the future of the DCEU. The past Flash was played by John Wesley Shipp, who played the character in the 90s TV series. Last year, the Arrowverse went to solve their multiverse problem. Supergirl had begun a standalone series at CBS before moving to the CW, meaning that when Team Arrow and Flash needed a moment with the Kryptonians, they had to breach the universes. To put Flash, Supergirl, and Black Lightning all on the same page, they turned to an old classic, Crisis on Infinite Earths. That crossover event did more than just connect the various Burly anti-shows, though. It connected everything DC has ever done. Robert Wuhl's Alexander Knox character from Tim Burton's Batman made an appearance, as did Tom Welling's Clark Kent from Smallville. Even the voice of Batman himself, Kevin Conroy, got the chance to play Bruce Wayne in a live-action role. The biggest surprise and biggest clue that the future is bright for the DCEU was when Barry Allen met Barry Allen. Grant Gustin's TV Flash met Ezra Miller's cinematic Flash. That one adorable cameo by the most charismatic Justice League member on any Earth made everything DC had ever done canon. Just like the Crisis on Infinite Earths comic book event, the Crisis on Infinite Earths cleaned up the Arrowverse's messy multiverse problem by putting the teams all in the same universe. But it also set up the surviving alternate universes like Titans, Stargirl, Doom Patrol, and Swamp Thing over at the streaming DC universe, and of course, the DCEU. So why does all of this matter? After all, the Marvel Cinematic Universe has a multiverse. In fact, Doctor Strange is scheduled to explore the madness of that multiverse after characters like Scarlet Witch and Loki tinker with it. That door was opened by the Avengers as they traipsed through time to get their own set of Infinity Stones. Like Crisis, Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness will likely clean up the stray threads of Marvel's multiverse, possibly including titles they recently got the rights back to. Mutants, wink wink, nudge nudge, Fantastic Four. But just like Marvel got the head start on the whole shared universe, DC has had a head start on being adapted. Richard Donner's Superman created the superhero blockbuster in 1978. Tim Burton's Batman reinvented it in 1989. While Marvel had movies in the time before the MCU, they were the DC movies of that time, rough and mostly regrettable with a few shining stars. We see you, Blade fans. What up, Blade 2? Post-Crisis, all of those stories are now canon. In fact, that Michael Keaton rumor hints at exactly that the whole of the DC content in live action existed and can interact. It's not clear what Keaton will do exactly in the DCEU, but the likeliest role is in Flashpoint, which is set to be the basis of the upcoming Flash movie. That story features the Flash going back in time to save his mother, causing ripples throughout the universe that result in Thomas Wayne becoming Batman to avenge the death of his son Bruce in Crime Alley. It's not clear if Keaton will play Bat-Dad Thomas or if Ezra's reality skipping will visit the Burtonverse Batman. We Got This Covered has suggested that Keaton's contract would be for as much as 10 appearances, meaning that his elder Wayne might be more of a constant presence in the coming DCEU movies. Could that also mean he'll fill the role of Bruce Wayne the Mentor in a Batman Beyond live-action adaptation? Now anything is possible. What this means is that the DCEU has turned its perceived weakness into a strength. While the MCU has been led by the singular vision of Kevin Feige, there hasn't been that one voice over at DC that has created a bit of chaos tonally. But now with Feige being put in charge of even more of the entire MCU, including television, the MCU is carrying the weight of its own continuity. This makes the introduction of elements they previously didn't have the rights to a complication. How does the MCU integrate the mutants when they're so tied to history? While Feige has to carefully arrange the puzzle pieces, Crisis on Infinite Earths has provided a master key for the DCEU that allows any piece to fit anywhere they like. Where the MCU relies on building continuity, the DCEU model allows viewers to dip in and out as they see fit. Just a fan of the Arrowverse? Hey, you're covered. Just like the movies, you're good there too. Liking them both? They still connect. The MCU has to demand a certain degree of collaborations from its creators and the studio, a demand that notable creators like Joss Whedon and Patty Jenkins, both who ended up at the DCU, have struggled with. This gives more creative room over at DC that opens the doors for movies like Joker. Will the MCU continue to be amazing? Of course, things look great at the House of Ideas. But the future might even be brighter for the DCEU, and now it's set to rewrite the rules of a shared universe. That's the future of the DCEU. What are you looking forward to in the DCEU that makes it so bright?